Hello friends, Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to our latest video. Today we're going to look into some strange unidentified persons who were finally identified, some of them after decades. First up, the hitchhiker. In July 1971, officers of the Coos County Sheriff's Office were called out to the area of Snedden Creek in Coos Bay, Oregon, for reports of a deceased male teenager. When officers arrived at the scene, they were greeted with the body of a teenager, and they set about recovering him and trying to find his next of kin to notify them of his death. The trouble was that due to the limited forensic technologies available in 1971, they were unable to determine his cause of death, most likely because his remains were in an advanced state of decomposition. Now, there's not a whole lot of information about the initial discovery of this John Doe, and all we know is that the Coos County Sheriff's Office worked tirelessly trying to identify this young man, but came up short every single time. When nobody came forward to claim him and the Coos County Sheriff's Office failed to identify him, he was buried in the local cemetery, with his headstone simply reading, "Unidentified Male Juvenile." Little did the Coos County Sheriff's Office know that it would take 50 years to finally identify their John Doe, and the identification came from a very unlikely person. In 2016, a young woman who we will refer to as Miss X started her journey to find her biological parents. Miss X was born in the 1970s and was given up for adoption as a baby, as her parents were unable to care for her as they were just little more than children themselves. She was later adopted by a couple who gave her the life that her biological parents were unable to provide at the time. As Miss X got older, she began to wonder more and more about her biological parents and longed to reach out and connect with them. In 1988, with the help of a private investigator, Miss X did indeed find her biological mother's name and was able to track her down and establish a connection. After some time, her biological mother also gave her her father's name, Winston Arthur Maxi III. Miss X excitedly tried to track down her biological father, wondering how their reunion would play out. But in the process of doing so, she learned some troubling news. After speaking with Winston's sister, she found out that Winston hadn't been seen since 1971, when he left his home in Boise, Idaho, headed for Coos Bay, Oregon. Winston's sister explained that they had no idea whether he had reached his final destination and that he hadn't contacted them since. Winston's family were also shocked to hear that he had a daughter, and it appears that Winston himself probably wasn't aware that he had fathered a child that was later put up for adoption. In 2016, Miss X started a Facebook page titled, "Where in the World is Winston Maxi?" and appealed for anyone with any information to come forward. Little did Miss X and Winston's family know that his body had been laid in an unmarked grave for over 50 years. It wasn't until 2017, when the Coos County Sheriff's Office exhumed his remains to obtain a DNA sample, that they came one step closer to finding his identity. This sample was run through the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System database, but provided no hits. The Coos County Sheriff's Office then decided to reach out to Parabon Nanolabs and ask for their assistance in the case. Parabon was able to create a phenotype snapshot, and more importantly, were able to find familial matches thanks to their genealogy databases. Winston's sister was contacted by Parabon and was asked to provide a sample for comparison. Finally, in October 2021, the Coos County Sheriff's Office announced that the John Doe, found way back in 1971, had been formally and positively identified as Winston Arthur Maxi III, who was last seen in Boise, Idaho in 1971. Miss X, Winston's daughter, along with his sister, who has remained anonymous, are now appealing for anyone with information to come forward and, quote, do the right thing. If you have any information surrounding the death of Winston Arthur Maxi III in 1971, you're asked to contact the Coos County Sheriff's Office at 541-396-7800. Next up, Septic Tank Sam. April 13th, 1977, Charlie and Mavis McLeod were out hunting for a new pump for their septic tank. The two had recently bought an abandoned farm in Towfield near Edmonton, Canada, and decided that if anywhere would have a pump, there might be one left on the farm. The two hurried to the farm, with Charlie jumping into action and opening up the septic tank to examine its contents. As Charlie opened the lid and stared into the abyss of the septic tank, he was shocked to see a human leg bobbing around in the waste. The body had been wrapped in a yellow bed sheet and tied up with rope. Charlie ran back to his car as fast as he could and drove himself and Mavis to the Tofield RCMP office to report what he had found. Frightened and shocked, Charlie entered the office and tried to recall the details the best he could to the officers in charge. After calming him down and getting as much information as they could, the McLeods and 2 officers from the RCMP made their way back to the abandoned farm. Reports indicate that the RCMP used old ice cream pails to scoop out the waste, throwing it wherever they could in order to get to the body. After some time, they were able to lift the body out of the septic tank. For the McLeods and the RCMP, this nightmare was just beginning, however. The autopsy report would shock Tofield and much of Canada, leaving people to wonder who could be capable of something so sadistic and depraved. As the remains were in such an advanced state of decomposition and this person had suffered greatly, it was hard for the RCMP to identify him at that time. Without any leads, he became simply known as Septic Tank Sam, a rather undignified moniker indeed. The coroner reported that Sam's cause of death was 2 gunshots to the head and chest, but this wasn't the end of Sam's injuries. Sam had been tortured before his captors put him out of his misery. He'd been tied up, beaten, and burned with objects such as cigarettes and a butane blowtorch. Sam had also been sexually mutilated, which made it difficult for the coroner to even ascertain his gender for many months. The RCMP was horrified at these findings and concluded that the person responsible must have had a personal vendetta against Sam. The RCMP hoped that by identifying Sam, they would also find his killer, but this was a task that proved to be much more difficult than they anticipated. Sam was found wearing a blue Levi's shirt with snap buttons, a gray t-shirt, blue jeans, and imitation wallaby shoes. The RCMP worked with the theory that Sam was possibly a migrant construction worker due to his clothing and his choice of footwear. A facial approximation was made of Sam by the RCMP and was circulated around Edmonton in the hopes that somebody would recognize him, but sadly, nobody came forward. The RCMP worked tirelessly, chasing down every lead to its end in the hopes of giving Sam his name back. The RCMP believed that whomever had done this to Sam was familiar with the Tofield area and knew that the farm was abandoned. Despite this, no one came forward with Sam's identity or any information that could lead to his killer or killers. In fact, this killer or killers likely watched this drama unfold on the news, all the while smugly believing that they would never be caught and that Sam would remain a John Doe forever. However, thanks to advancements in science and forensic technologies, Sam would not remain a John Doe forever. And in 2020, the RCMP reached out to Othram Incorporated, a private forensic genealogy company based in Texas. Othram works with law enforcement agencies to identify John Does like Sam, as well as uncover perpetrators who thought they had gotten away with their evil crimes. Othram is currently crowdfunding a host of cases, and it costs around $5,000 to begin DNA sequencing. If you're able to help, please contribute to Othram, find the link in the description, and help bring other John Does back home. Othram became involved with Sam's case and obtained a DNA sample for sequencing and comparison and found familial matches to their John Doe. It wasn't all smooth sailing for Othram, though, as the DNA profile was significantly degraded. David Middleman, Othram's CEO, told CBS News it was very degraded. There was a lot of bacteria in it. It was only a small minority that was actually human DNA, but there was sufficient material. From here, DNA samples were obtained from family members, and in June 2021, the RCMP, along with Othram, held a press conference to announce that after 44 long years, Septic Tank Sam had finally been identified. In the press conference, it was revealed that Septic Tank Sam had been formally and positively identified as 25-year-old Gordon Sanderson of Edmonton, Canada. According to Gordon's family, he had been a part of the 60s scoop, where Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their homes and sent into care or adopted out to white families. Gordon spent his life between care homes, and as a result of being separated from his family, he struggled with trauma and addiction. Gordon's family were both elated and heartbroken at the bittersweet news. They had finally found out what had happened to their loved one, and were heartbroken to learn that he had left this earth in such a cruel way. Gordon had been reported missing in the 1980s by his sister Joyce, but it appears that his case was pushed to the side, which is a sad testament to the attitudes toward the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples in Canada. Sergeant Jason Zazalak of the RCMP said, "I think it was a combination of a sense of mourning, but also relief. Definitely some feelings of anger toward what Gordy went through in his life and what was done to him." While Gordon has been identified, the RCMP are still searching for his killer. If you have any information, you're urged to please contact the Tofield RCMP at 780-662-3353. Next up, Physics John Doe. On January 2nd, 2015, the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office was called to the scene after passersby found the remains of a man on an access road between Motel 6 and Rohnert Park Expressway Self-Storage in Rohnert Park, California. There are limited details about this discovery, and all that we know is that the man was found with science, math, and physics journals. When the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office was unable to identify him, they took to calling him Physics John Doe after the books and journals he was found with. The Sheriff's Office was contacted by members of the Rohnert Park Library who felt that they recognized the man from sketches that they had seen on the news. Sadly, however, no one was able to provide his name, and it appears that John Doe hadn't borrowed any books from the library, as there was no name on file. Despite all these setbacks, the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office was determined to identify Physics John Doe and return him to his family for a proper burial. After circulating an approximation sketch to the local media and getting no results, they decided to harness forensic technologies instead. In a statement to the sfgate.com, the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office said, "Despite exhausting our coroner, missing, and unidentified persons protocols, he remained unidentified for 6 years. These protocols included DNA samples sent for combined DNA index system upload, dental charting through Missing Persons Sacramento, forensic anthropologic studies at Cal State Chico, and countless hours canvassing the area and local homeless shelters, and the dissemination of law enforcement informational flyers." For years, the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office kept the case open, hoping that one day new information would come to light that would help them crack the case. Then, in 2018, they partnered with the DNA Doe Project, which is a nonprofit organization that works with law enforcement to provide forensic and genealogical services to identify John and Jane Does. The DNA Doe Project also accepts donations towards cases. Look for a link in the description. A DNA sample from Physics John Doe was obtained and sent to the DNA Doe Project for processing. DNA processing and analysis can take weeks, even months, and the process is a lot more drawn out and complex than crime shows make it out to be. It wasn't until December 2021 that the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office held a press conference and announced that the Physics John Doe had been formally identified as 48-year-old Stephen Patrick Archer of Seattle, Washington. The DNA Doe Project was able to track down Stephen's mother and asked her to submit a DNA sample for comparison. Using mitochondrial DNA, the DNA Doe Project and the Department of Justice Office were able to confirm that the body found in 2012 was indeed Stephen. According to official reports, the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office does not believe that Stephen's death was suspicious, and they are now working with his family to return his body home. Next, we have Elorado Jane Doe. The case of the Elorado Jane Doe haunted investigators for decades, and the investigation into her true identity sent them on a wild goose chase to find the truth. On July 10, 1991, a woman was found shot in a Whitehall motel room in Elorado, Arkansas. After speaking with those at the motel, police learned that she went by the name Mercedes and worked as a sex worker who was being pimped out by her ex-boyfriend, James McAlpin. On the evening of July 10, 1991, McAlpin had lured Jane Doe to his room at the Whitehall Motel under the guise of money. The two had broken off their relationship, but McAlpin wasn't going to let Jane get away that easily. He was obsessive and abusive and stalked her, sending her threatening messages, and was known to have assaulted her numerous times during their relationship. Jane Doe reluctantly went to McAlpin's hotel room where the two spent some time together. As she tried to leave, she was dragged back into the room, and those in neighboring rooms at the motel reported hearing screams and McAlpin himself screaming, "Get back in the room, bitch." However, before anyone had a chance to intervene and de-escalate the situation, two loud gunshots rang out, echoing throughout the motel block. Jane Doe was dead after being assaulted and shot by her ex-boyfriend, and those staying at the motel reported seeing McAlpin get into his car and speed away from the scene, fearing the repercussions of his actions. Luckily, McAlpin didn't make it far before he was arrested, and when the police failed to make an identification at the scene, they paid him a visit to obtain more information. Of course, McAlpin didn't want to help the police, so they filed the necessary paperwork and obtained Jane Doe's personal belongings. Investigators thought they'd had a stroke of luck when their hands brushed over an ID card that bore the name Cheryl Ann Wick. The investigators got the shock of their lives when they contacted Cheryl's family, when who should answer the phone but Cheryl herself. So who was this Jane Doe? This wasn't the only alias that Jane Doe used, and investigators were also able to uncover the additional aliases of Kelly Carr, Shannon Wiley, Cheryl Kaufman, and Sharon Wiley. Investigators theorized that Jane Doe had stolen all these identities and worked to uncover the reason as to why she didn't use her real name. They speculated that Jane Doe may have been a runaway from Florida who was traveling around the country, stealing identities and living new lives. Those who knew Jane Doe as Mercedes or Kelly Carr told investigators that she had arrived in Elorado from Dallas in early 1991 and that she had worked as a sex worker and in bars. There were many different accounts given by Jane Doe, and when the police put them all together, it became difficult to figure out what was the truth and what was fiction. Jane Doe made bizarre claims of being in the witness protection program because her dad was in the mafia, and that was why she used different names. She told other people that she was wanted for bank robbery and had to steal identities in order to stay under the radar. What was clear was Jane Doe's arrest record, which revealed that between 1990 and 1991, she'd been arrested a total of 4 times in Texas and Arkansas. It appears that each time she was arrested, she gave the name Cheryl Ann Wick, which, as we know, was an identity she had stolen from someone else. With a fake name and address on record with her fingerprints, the option of identifying her from those prints was quickly ruled out. For years, Jane Doe's case perplexed all those who came across it. Online sleuths desperately tried to piece the puzzle together and found nothing. But then in 2019, the DNA Doe Project submitted Jane Doe's DNA into GED Match, a genealogy database. Elorado Police Detective Lieutenant Kathy Phillips told the Huffington Post that through familial DNA and connections, they were able to ascertain that Jane Doe was a descendant of Daniel Wood and Mamie Carter of Virginia. They also managed to find Jane Doe's second cousin, Christina Tilford of Alabama. Unfortunately, Christine had no recollection of her second cousin and told the Huffington Post that she didn't recognize Jane Doe, but could see a family resemblance. It seems that the rest of Christina's family also had no idea about Jane Doe, with Lieutenant Phillips adding they didn't have any knowledge of anybody running away, being reported missing, or put up for adoption or anything. So we think she was born out of wedlock. We're getting DNA from other family members to try and narrow it down. While on the street, Jane Doe told those that she met that she had been forced into sex work at the tender age of 16 by a man she had met while homeless. When she turned 18, she continued working of her own volition and had been involved in abusive relationships and many turbulent situations. Jane Doe's life was plagued with so much tragedy and sadness that even her own family did everything they could to hide her existence, hoping that she would sadly and simply fade into the background. Thankfully, Christina has since vowed to find her second cousin's identity and has opted to give her the name of Memory until her real name can be found. In death, Memory deserves the compassion and respect that she never received in life. Anyone with any information is urged to contact Lieutenant Kathy Phillips at 870-881-4810. Alternatively, you can contact the Elorado Crime Stoppers on 1-870-863-4636. And finally, we have Bill Lewis. In 1983, a farmer checking his fox traps near Rensselaer, Indiana, which is in Jasper County, made a horrific discovery. In the field before him lay the skeletal remains of a young man with shoulder-length reddish-brown hair. The farmer sprinted back to his property and called the Jasper County Sheriff's Office, who arrived on the scene shortly after. The Jasper County coroner, Andy Boersma, determined that the young man's cause of death was a homicide, and that his next job was to notify his family. Problem was, however, that they had no idea what the young man's name was. Jasper County Sheriff's Office scoured through missing persons reports and appealed for anyone with information to come forward, but sadly, nobody recognized the boy. The first big break in the case didn't come until 1994, when convicted serial killer Larry Eiler confessed to Indiana authorities that he had picked up a teenager matching the John Doe's description on November 20th, 1982, along U.S. Route 41. Eiler told investigators that the teenager with long reddish-brown hair had been hitchhiking, and that he had driven past him and offered him a lift. Sadly, Eiler was unable to provide any details about the teenager's identity, only giving authorities the gruesome details of what he did to him. He confessed to drugging the teenager, driving him out to Jasper County, and then murdering him. Eiler's account sickened investigators and only spurred them on more. They weren't content to let a sick serial killer be the only one to know what the John Doe looked like in life, and were determined to return him to his family. The investigation continued at a steady pace until 2021, when Andy Boersma, the Jasper County coroner, contacted Redgrave Research Forensics and requested their assistance. Redgrave Research Forensic Services were able to use DNA obtained from John Doe to narrow down a list of potential relatives. After conducting interviews, they obtained a DNA sample from a potential match, and incredibly, months later, it came back as solid. In December of 2021, the Jasper County John Doe was officially identified as 19-year-old Bill Lewis. Lewis's nephew, Joshua Shuck, told the Kokomo Tribune, "My dad said he just disappeared. He was there one day and then gone the next." Bill's family told investigators that the last time they heard from him, he was hitchhiking from Houston to Peru in November 1982 after attending a funeral. Bill's old classmates said that he loved nothing more than playing football, but was forced to quit after breaking his left leg. This shock exit from the sport he loved pushed him over the edge, and he withdrew from school. Bill's family are now making arrangements to have his remains transported back to Peru, Indiana for proper burial. Andy Boersma told the Kokomo Tribune, "Hopefully, this will give this family a little bit of rest and comfort, knowing that we can return their brother's remains and uncle's remains back to them to be placed in the cemetery at home in Peru." Well, folks, there you have it. Amazing advancements that's been made in DNA technology in the last several decades. Hopefully, more of these John and Jane Does can be identified and give closure to their families. I look forward to your comments, but please keep it friendly and respectful. In the meanwhile, be good to yourselves and each other, and I'll see you just a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.